Hello, this is Queer Chat
with Brian.
and Terry, and we are glad you've joined us today. Now, Brian, last week we talked about character traits,
Right,
and
right,
we're discussing we're calling it a model, but we're
right,
discussing a whole map of the methodology of things that go on in our lives
right.
as we recognize, accept,
Mhm.
and possibly express to the world that we are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, whatever we are.
Queer, questioning, all
Yes.
sorts of gender
Well,
fluid, all sorts of identities that we're looking at here.
you
So
know
we've been
what we are
developing
here?
this.
Let me
We've
tell
been,
you something. Here's what we are. When you think about LGBTQ plus, we're the plus. Go ahead.
so here's our model we've been looking at. We've talked about a lot of different things. We talked about these identities and different ways that we come about figuring out our identities. We talked about health and the different elements of health. We've looked at values and specifically those around honesty and authenticity. And this next couple ones, we're going to look at ethics, but today we're going to zero in and continue our discussion from last time on character traits. Now,
We've done a lot.
what is a character trait that is kind of different from ethics? How would you distinguish the two, Terry?
Well, this may not match book definitions,
Mhm.
but I think of ethics as a framework
Mhm.
that I use to make decisions. I think of ethics, that's a good phrase, the decision making model for my life.
Okay,
Whereas the character traits are who I am.
right, right. And I think of ethics as a construct, and
Yes.
that unlike a character trait that sort of bubbles up from within, I think we put together these ethics. And there are a lot more external factors that determine how we have structured our ethics. Whereas, like character traits, a lot more innate. And some people believe that you don't change your character traits or your personality traits over time. But certainly you can moderate those, I think, and work to develop certain skills. And I think they're you can look at them maybe as like honesty or braveness or empathy as a skill that you can develop.
Yeah. Well, I like a couple things you said. One is bubble up.
Mhm.
That just, I think sometimes I bubble up a little bit more than people are ready for. Um, but yeah, there's two phrases that I use sometimes. I would say character traits are descriptive.
Mhm.
They describe who we are, whereas ethics are prescriptive. They prescribe our actions.
Okay,
Like a
interesting.
doctor's prescription is telling you what to
Yeah,
do.
yeah, I
Yeah,
like that.
descriptive versus prescriptive.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Now I want part of the royalties on your book if you put that in there.
Well, I thought we were working on that book together. We've already
Oh,
talked
we
about
are? Oh,
it. Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Okay, good.
So we had looked last time at some different character traits and around braveness and vulnerability and courage. We looked at some around non judgmental and compassionate and self acceptance. We continued
Yes,
our
and
discussion of where.
can I throw in there on that kind? We don't have to put the word there. I think it's
Okay,
wrapped
well,
up
you're
in
jumping
the.
ahead. You're sort of getting us to where we're talking about today. So
Oh,
uh,
okay.
we had talked about adding these four particular additional character traits to our matrix here and sort of rounding out the discussion. And these
Yes.
four, kind is one of those.
Oh, it's on
Uh,
there.
yeah, so it's right here.
I didn't realize we'd added it.
Yeah. Well, we
We
haven't
talked about it.
connected it yet we haven't discussed it and connected it yet to our thing. And so
Okay.
that's what we'll be doing today. So why don't we start out then with kind? And when we sort of discussed beforehand, I think kind sort of goes over here in this notion of maybe non-judgmental and compassion and self-acceptance. But how do you see kind working as sort of maybe a slight nuance of these other terms?
Well, and I don't know if kind is, the way we've described character traits as a something that comes out from within us. This is certainly something I'm suggesting we cultivate. It may be more of an ethic. It may be something we do,
Hmm.
a choice we make. But damn, be kind to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we beat ourselves up so much.
Right.
We're so harsh to ourselves,
Hmm.
and we are judgmental to ourselves. Sometimes when I'm working with somebody that's trying to identify some of the things in their lives, they just can't say it without making a value judgment about it. So they say, for example, I speak too much. I talk too much. I know that.
Hmm.
All right. Now I can say I talk too much. That's a statement of fact.
Hmm.
Or I can make a value judgment about it. And I can say, I'm so damn talkative. It's bad. I'm bad.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
And I'm not being kind to myself.
Right. And I sort of like maybe kind as a character trait versus thinking a bit of it as an ethic, because I do think some people are maybe a little more hardwired to be gentler with themselves. Like my
Okay.
husband LJ has always been able, I think, to just really appreciate who he is and the contributions that he makes to society and to the relationship, and just really sort of sit in a space where he feels like he's enough.
Hmm.
And to where, whereas I think I'm very different. It's like I always feel like I have to prove myself, and you can sort of frame that as, well, I'm really ambitious and he's not, but I think he's got something there that I don't, that I really aspire to. And that's just sort of this notion of, yeah, it's great to try to do more and to do better, but why? Like, what is that coming from? Is that coming out of a need to validate yourself, to prove that you're worthy? When it comes out of that, then I don't think it's as healthy as we might think it is. So, one of my mantras for a couple months ago was just to be kind to others, be kind to myself. And I think that is just sort of almost like a more fundamental reaction that you have in a particular situation. That then, if you can sort of get that as a key character trait and just think, be kind, then
You
that
know,
can lead to non-judgment. It can lead to compassion.
you've said something very profound, and I think this may be worth adding another word: enoughness.
Hmm.
Um, enoughness. This is what you said that was profound. Enoughness is not a lack of aspiration. Now,
Yeah.
however we want to word that, enoughness is not a
Right.
lack of ambition, aspiration, goals. That's not the point. It's a sense of self that is so essential.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Now the
brilliant.
my computer here is saying enoughness is not a word, but I like it.
Oh, it is now.
Yeah.
The dictionaries are going to have to include it in the next year or two when this thing blows up and
Yeah.
goes viral.
Right.
Yeah.
Oops. Alrighty.
All right, good. So, yeah, so we've looked at those things, and so uh, today what we're trying to do is see how some of these other things fit in, and kind of
Right.
wrap up the discussion of character traits. So we've just
Right.
talked about being kind. Um, you liked which one would you like to address?
I think patience is
I
is
knew
one
you
that
were
I'd
going to
like
that
to.
one.
What's
I
that?
almost suggested it for you. I knew you were going there. I can hardly wait. Tell me
Yes.
about patience. I'm anxious to hear about it. Don't make me wait any longer.
As we're talking about the coming out process and just a lot of the struggles that we go through, I think patience is one of the critical character traits that we can try and cultivate. So often we tell someone uh, we reveal our authentic selves to someone and we expect them to react a certain way, or we want them to get to where we want them to be very quickly, or we think, well, now that I'm out, I need to just tell everybody. There's a lot of that initial feeling of once you taste that drug of authenticity, you want more, you want more, you want more. And
Give me a
I,
fix.
yeah, and I think patience is really critical because sometimes we may rush into a situation where we come out to someone and may not be ready. We may not have thought through things. We may expect someone to, immediately react in a certain way. So I think patience is really key. And I think I really zero in on that because I am one of the least patient persons. I'm like, when I get an idea, I'm like, boom, go, and that's sort of how I came out. I was just like, it was just booming.
Well, patience, a counterbalance to or an element of it is to remember that it ties in very closely to safety that we've talked about.
Right, right,
Um, there is, we don't want in this whole process of either coming out or staying in, we don't want any of it to result in undue risk to our
right, right,
safety.
right,
And patience helps us to protect that safety.
right, right,
It also, it not only helps protect us from the external, it helps protect us from ourselves.
right.
Because sometimes we know it's a process of understanding. And if I say to the world I'm X,
Hmm.
and then after a while I discover that I'm something else,
Hmm.
and there are nuances, patience gives me the time to understand the nuances of my life.
Wow, that's see, there you go. You should have saved that one for the end of our show. That's one of those profound
Oh,
Terry
oh, wow, that was beautiful,
witticisms.
wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to write that down though. Okay, tell me, can you
Yeah.
can you remember that?
No, I'd say right at patience gives us the time to understand the nuances of ourselves or of our lives.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I
Yeah.
like that. I'm gonna put that as like a little thought bubble here.
Well, we could make posters and have maybe a beach scene with some seagulls. And
Yeah.
have you ever seen a seagull in a hurry?
No, what does a seagull in a hurry do? I'll bite.
No, it just hurries to the food. I don't know. My point is they don't.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so now
All
one of
right.
the things we're doing today that our listeners may not be aware of, we've been working on figuring out the timing for these. So we're
Right.
trying to make a shorter clip.
Right.
So we'd like people to let us know which format do they prefer. The longer one, they don't have to sit and do it in one setting.
Right.
They can always have leftovers.
Right.
But we're trying to look at doing some things a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
So let's go on. I'd like to
Let's have you tackle optimism. And as we're
okay.
talking about character traits versus ethics, I'm kind of thinking maybe we put religious spiritual up in ethics.
Oh no, don't do that yet.
All right, let's put it there.
Hold your horses.
All right. So
Be
why don't you explain
patient,
that? Talk
Brian.
talk
Be
about religious
patient.
spiritual.
Okay. So what are we talking about?
So you talked about religious spiritual now then.
Okay. So religious and spiritual does inform our ethics. It
Hmm.
is a basis for ethics when we think of our decision making.
Hmm.
Religious and spiritual is a construct that helps us in our decision making processes. But by this, I'm thinking more of religious and spiritual in terms of um, my identity. One of my favorite biblical passages is when in the Old Testament there's a story about Moses, and he's left a life of luxury, and now he's living in the desert as a shepherd. And God appears to Moses and gives him instructions and says, I want you to go lead all my people. And Moses says, something like, yeah, right. And who am I going to tell him said so? Now, it's not exactly the translation, but and God, so he says, God, who are you? What's your name? What am I going to call you? And God says, I am. And I just love that because God is saying that my being is who I am, and you
Hmm.
can't make me into something else.
Hmm.
You can't box me in.
Mhm.
I am becoming, I am being, I am.
Mhm.
And so when I think of religious and spiritual, one of the things that hangs us up a lot of times is this whole thing about church, and there are churches who don't believe in us.
Right.
There are churches who condemn us.
Okay.
I have a visceral action when I drive around town and I see churches, and they are in abundance,
Mhm.
who believe that I am living in a life of sin, and just because of who I am. And might begrudgingly let me into their midst if I were to give a long repentance.
Right.
And,
So where
um,
do you connect this then with religious spiritual as a character trait? How is spirituality, then sort of a character trait? Is the character trait, caring about it? Because
well,
I sort of have that where, one of my husbands is much more religious, comes from a Mormon background. Scott's very religious, whereas LJ, grew up unchurched and spirituality is not important to him. So would you say
no,
maybe it's the importance of that in our lives that's the character trait?
well, I don't, importance might be a measure of it. I don't think the metric is the factor, it's the existence.
Hmm. Okay.
And it's something we all can cultivate. I think there's a spiritual nature in all of us.
Hmm.
And um, it's that connection to the universe. It's that connection to ourselves. It's that connection to what I like to call the creative force in the world.
Okay.
And so some people put that in religious terms, and some people maybe put it in personal terms and give it a name like God. Some
Hmm.
people may put it in some other kinds of ethereal terms,
Hmm.
whatever it is. But our spiritual life, it is our ability to connect with who we are, find meaning in our lives, find understanding of our identity and where we fit in with the world. The religious is an expression of that. And sometimes we get those two confused. And that's where a lot of LGBTQ people have difficulty.
Hmm.
And it's where a lot of people have difficulty with LGBTQ people.
Hmm.
And that is when the religious ideas that we establish, this framework, and this is a factor in just about every religion. They tell us that this is right, this is wrong. They do get into the ethical framework,
Hmm.
but there is no innate wrongness, and that's what the key to I am is. There is no innate wrongness in my being. So the spiritual is the innate rightness of being.
Okay.
Wow. I could have taught philosophy. Um,
All righty. So let's talk
yeah,
about, let's go ahead and wrap up today when talk about
okay.
optimism and the need for optimism.
But can I finish one thing about religious spiritual?
Sure.
I would suggest that anybody that is having difficulty reconciling their religious concepts or their spiritual
Mhm.
concepts with their identity or with somebody else's identity, I would recommend that they find someone to talk to who's gone down this road.
Right. Yeah. Very helpful.
Yeah, go ahead. Now, optimism. I
Yeah.
don't think you can do it.
Optimism.
I don't
I
think you
think,
can
I
do it.
think a important mantra to have as you're navigating, discovering who you are, as you're starting to be more authentic with yourself, as you're sharing that with others, is to really just keep in mind this optimistic view towards things because things may get tough, it may get difficult, but in those times, just your mantra should be, it gets better. It gets better. Optimism is so key for me as you're going through anything in life, especially coming out.
Yes. And can you define better? That's key here, I think. It gets better. What
Like,
if,
what do you have in mind in asking the question?
well, some people don't ever get to come out. If I am stuck in the closet for 60 years, how has it gotten better? Or how can it get better?
Well, I'm saying as you continue on this journey, as you continue to, sort of take, the journey of 1,000 miles begins in one step. So as you
Oh,
continue to take that first step, that second step, and continue on, there may be times when you think, wow, I just can't do this. And, a lot of this really relates to, uh, just keeping out of these very crippling depressions. And I
mhm.
think that's really speaking into those moments, in those places of darkness and depression, that it's important for us to think, well, this is not the end. This does not have to be the end of your life, the end of your story. Take that next step, and you can pull yourself out of those moments of darkness. And so by it gets better, I mean that this temporary problem that you have does not need a permanent solution.
Okay, so better, um,
Better than
may,
things are now, when
yeah,
you're in these darker places.
better is not an arrival at a destination. It's a method for the journey. It's like getting better walking shoes for the journey.
I don't quite get that metaphor, but so break it
Well,
down
no,
for
I
me.
mean, if we are walking on the journey
Yeah,
and our shoes are uncomfortable,
yeah.
we're
Oh, you break
wearing
them in.
shoes of depression or shoes of being down on ourselves or whatever. But good walking shoes can enable us to keep going.
Yeah, and then you do break them in. You sort of have to like break them down before you can break them in. Um,
Yes. So we can to our merch, we'll add some walking shoes.
there you go.
Yeah. So you know what? I'm in a couple of 12-step programs,
Uh-huh.
and a couple of mottos that we use in there. Uh, it gets better before it's over. If it ain't better, it ain't over.
Hmm. Interesting.
And but there's another one, don't quit before the miracle happens.
Yeah, that's a
Don't
good one.
stop before the miracle happens. And you know, the miracle is coming. We just keep going forward. The miracle doesn't mean, for example, in my case, I'm a transgender woman. The miracle, it's easy for me to think the miracle is when I can live fully and freely as a woman. Oh, I'm doing that now.
Mhm,
Oh, the miracle is when I can finally save up money for surgery. Oh,
mhm,
I'm working on that now.
mhm.
The miracle is when I can finally have all the surgeries that make my body uh, fit the image of womanhood that I have in my mind. Spoiler alert, only 99.999 whatever percent of women are dissatisfied with the body that they have. You know?
A lot of us men too.
Yeah. Well, so let the finest surgeons in the world craft for me the most exquisite feminine appearance.
Hmm.
There's still something, you know?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
um, the miracle is not the destination. The optimism is not toward the destination. It's
right.
learning to live on the journey.
Uh, yeah, I think that's great advice. Let me add one final thought, and then I'll let you wrap us up today,
Okay.
Terry. In terms of things that we were talking about, I would connect this concept of optimism then with this concept of I am enough. And I think part of optimism is not, as you're saying, maybe that it gets better. Like, I'm in this situation, and then I can imagine that, now I'm gonna have, like you said, I'm gonna have the body that I want, I'm gonna have all the friends, I'm gonna have the relationship, I'm gonna have all these things, but I think it's sometimes just recognizing as you move through this difficult process that where you are is okay. And it's an optimism about your beliefs about your situation. And I think that's something that, we can all, kind of just, when we accept where we are is where we will truly find happiness.
Yes. And what I'd like to say to wrap all of this up, as we talk about character traits, I want to pose just the opposite.
Okay.
Because the purpose of this entire exercise is to provide some things that are helpful and reflect our experience.
Right.
But there's nothing on any of this that someone has to do. So
Right.
just for the fun of it, let me take the word honesty.
Okay.
Somebody can be a compulsive liar
Okay.
and still be completely who they are, LGBTQ plus.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
Honesty with yourself and with others helps, is what we're saying.
Yes. Right.
But what's important for us to keep in mind is there is no, we talk about descriptive and prescriptive. There is no must. There is no should.
Right.
There is no ought. There is no prescriptive thing
Right.
that if you don't do this, you won't be gay. If you don't do
Yeah. Right.
this, you
Right.
won't be transgender.
Right.
You are whoever you are.
Right.
We're just trying to provide some help
Yeah.
along
Just
the
some
way.
things to think about, things to consider.
Yeah.
So I think that's good way to sort of remind us where we are on this in this process and what we're trying to accomplish today. So thanks very much, Teri. As always, it was fantastic chatting with you. And I look forward to our next.
Oh, our next queer chat. Is that my cue?
That was your cue. You
Why
got
don't you
it.
say
You got
that
it,
again, and
baby.
I'll be ready this time.
All righty. And I look forward to our next
Queer chat with
Brian.
and Teri.
Love you,
Well, stay
darling.
tuned,
Love
same
ya.
bat channel.
Mwah.